what has been your biggest enlightenment with intuitive eating? Biggest insight?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So when I found intuitive eating, and I wish I could remember how the book came into my life because I don't. The book came into my life, though, probably about 15 years ago at this point, at a time in my life where my life was falling apart, hugely falling apart. That's a long story for another podcast, but suffice it to say, as it was falling apart, I was getting divorced. My kids were like 13 and 15, I think, at the time. And we were in a very religious community at the time. My ex-husband was a pastor. All the things blew up kind of thing. And I realized at the time, I was already a therapist, but I was having a lot of trouble eating. And I mean, crying over what to eat or what to feed my kids, and recognizing at the time that I'd had an eating disorder since I was 12, basically. When I first, what I now know was I rounded out through puberty, my mom's response, and this is not to blame my mom, that's a whole other story too, but her response was to take me to what a predecessor of Weight Watchers, basically. So in other words, it was wrong for me to be overweight.
Yeah.
What I know now in terms of the, because at this point I've had almost 20 years experience working with eating disorders. I'm a certified eating disorder specialist and a certified eating disorder supervisor, if you're familiar with the International Association of Eating Disorders certifications. I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor. So I've done a lot of work around this and figured out, but at the time, because of the stress of the divorce and all the things, my eating disorder got worse than ever, because a lot of people live in sort of a subclinical disordered eating life. What I ask people to sort of diagnose it in a non-technical way is what percentage of your thoughts are taken over by your eating disorder? What percentage of your life? And so that way, it's not so much about saying, ooh, you have an eating disorder. It's about saying, do you want your life to be different? And that was what really drew me to it, was hearing this screaming in my head over and over and over again about, you have to lose weight, you have to lose weight, if you know, and enough of me at that point, I was a therapist already, so I knew it was like, surely everybody doesn't think this way all the time. So I found the book, and honestly, due to the disaster that was going on in my personal life in Florida at the time, I didn't feel safe talking about this with anybody there. I just picked up the phone and called Elise Rush, who wrote the book.
Wow.
So, and she, she did phone sessions, and we worked together. And so going to what was the biggest insight, I think it helped me tremendously to have somebody get me, because when I read the book, I was like, oh my God, she's been in my head. This is crazy. There was so much about it. I grew up in a diet world. I was on a diet from when I was 12 till I started working with Elise. And I think I was in my 40s at that time. So a long time. And I had that sort of, what I recognize now and what I talk to people a lot too is, in that life, you wake up every morning thinking, today's the day I'm going to lose 10 pounds. You go to bed every night feeling like a failure because you don't lose 10 pounds in a day. But that's been your life. That's sort of how you wake up. It's a shame cycle,
Yeah.
So her saying, it's okay. You're okay. It's okay. She understood pieces of my story. The first few sessions, literally, I just cried, both because I had so much to release, and almost it was just so great that somebody understood me too. And so that began my passionate journey with intuitive eating.
Wow. That's so powerful. So she was in your head when you read that book.
Yeah.
That was like the first book you picked up. It's an amazing book. I mean, it's just like, it's like the Bible or something for intuitive. It's amazing.
Well, when it comes to freedom and the phrase and being curious and not judging, is something I probably talk about every day, because now I'm in private practice. I see clients regularly, and I work with them a lot on finding this space of curiosity. So, because when you take the judgment out, you're shame busting, you're allowing space to recognize what's really going on, and create that awareness.
Yeah, it's crazy how those judgments can be like, we don't really notice they're there. Like for many years, you might have thought, I got to lose 10 pounds in a day. And I kind of feel that from some people where it's like, it's this, maybe in their head, they know intellectually like, 10 pounds in a day or in a very short period of time isn't realistic. But then it doesn't work out, their emotions and their gut instinct is still like, frustration. And it's crazy, or not crazy, just, I mean, it is crazy. It's what it is. It's, that whole thing. But it's crazy that we can believe those or be guided by those thoughts that are just unrealistic, and not know that we're being guided, or know that we're being guided, but not consciously choose a different route. Yeah. Because it sounded like for many years, like you had been kind of guided by thoughts and food, and then that with the whole stress. And what made you get the book Intuitive Eating? Like, you said you don't remember how you got it.
I don't remember. Yeah.
I wonder. Wow. Yeah. No. Yeah. Interesting. What do you? It really resonated with you. Yeah. So judgment versus curiosity. How does someone start to get into that space, especially if they're new to intuitive eating, if they're brand new to this whole thing? And I guess it starts with learning about diets, but maybe there's a different approach as well. What do you think?
Yes, this is going to sound, I don't care, maybe cliche, but honestly, the way to start is by taking a breath. And just like, especially if we're talking to someone who's gotten the book, has read the book, and has connected with even 50% of the book, then just allowing space to take a breath, to be grateful for the increased awareness, and to notice that most likely, because in a lot of times within what I would just say disordered relationship with food, because it's where food's in charge of you instead of you being in charge of it, or however you want to define it, there is also accompanying that a sense of constant like fight or flight or panic. Like every day you're supposed to solve this problem, and every day you don't. And so it's very pervasive. And so being able to just pause and know that you're okay, it's going to be okay, and you're about to experience some change to your life, I think is the best way to start. Yeah.
And when someone is coming into intuitive eating, it's especially, from so much pain, and it's so many expectations missed and feelings of failure that built up and all that. When they get into intuitive eating, it of course can be a mind scramble, right? Like, what is going on? It's flipping me open. That's why I like the word enlightenment. It's like, what? Like, what?
Yes.
It's been opened. And it can be probably really easy to then say, you know what, I'm going to make rapid progress on eating, right? Like, whatever rapid progress means, right? Like,
but that's what you're used to.
Yeah, that's what you're used to. Was that your experience at all? And if it wasn't, it's okay if it wasn't. How would you recommend someone who's coming into this, that they're excited, but rapid progress is just their MO?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll share kind of what my clients experience. I love working with clients who are coming into intuitive eating, and ready or, want to do this. And then I frustrate the heck out of them because in the first session, I don't give them a list. And they literally stare at me. They're like, wait, what? I want some homework. Can I, and I'm like, well, all I want you to do this first week is notice what you notice and begin to basically decrease the judging and increase the noticing. And so it scares them. There's a lot of fear with that because without judgment, without bad and good, how do you know how to breathe? How do you know how to do life if you can't, most people are coming into this with a natural categorization of all things good or bad, a lot of black and white thinking. And that's why food rules become so satisfying to someone who's in crisis. And if their crisis mode of life is to separate things in good or bad, diets work great. And it's the same thing I run into because I also do financial wellness counseling, which, between me and you is intuitive spending. It's intuitive money. It's a lot of the same principles because a lot of the same things are so there. Like if you think, if your internal message is that debt is evil and you are in debt, then every day you've got to figure out how to get out of debt. And by whatever it is, even if you think, that you have to go outside every day and that's your rule. And if you don't go outside every day, your day is ruined. And then we had a blizzard a couple of weeks ago. It was a little challenging to go outside. So what you want to do is you want to look at how distressed do you get if you can't follow the rule. And with intuitive eating, it allows you to look at the rule and look at the distress. If you're distressed, if your rule is, I never eat sugar, and then all of a sudden you found out you had a bite of sugar, how distressed do you get? And that's how that's when you begin to look at it with curiosity, and then you can say, okay, why am I that distressed? What is leading to the distress? Is there another way I can look at this? Is there another way I can operate in a world where, sugar exists or whatever it may be?
Absolutely. This is a kind of a useful way to start your journey. Yeah. You mentioned earlier, like for years you didn't know you had an eating disorder. It's not like it's, your arm's not cut off, right?
Right.
And you're oftentimes in your head about it, and you don't really tell anyone. It's easy to hide it, and it's hard to discover. I think that's an interesting thing when you start becoming aware of how much distress does breaking those food rules. Yeah, and those food rules. Yeah, it's coming from that deep place of shame, and it's like to escape it, we create these black and white things where if we're good, then we're not in shame, but then it's like it's just too rigid or it's just impossible to always be in that food rule. How does someone recognize their food rules? Like, let's say a new client is coming in and they're not sold on intuitive eating, or they haven't heard of it. They just know something's off, or like something's off. And how do you help them become aware? I guess just noticing, you said that earlier, how do you bring awareness to food rules? Like that can be, on paper it sounds, oh, you got a rule. It's, you don't eat sugar. You have to go outside when it's, have you found that it's easy for people to identify their food rules, or do people kind of have to notice when they're stressed out and backtrack, or is there an exercise where you kind of just think of your food rules?
It's a little bit of both. Usually, I'll say a lot of times, one of the most important things to do in session when you're working therapeutically through this issue is to talk about food session and intuitive eating. It just doesn't cross their mind to say, and tell me what you ate this week, and let's talk about it. And so, and that's perfectly fine. Like that's, people are doing all kinds of therapy. In my sessions, I'm going to ask about food. I'm going to ask about what did you eat? And for most clients, no one has ever asked them that before. Huh. And so first they're kind of like, maybe embarrassed or a little hesitant to share. But once they get comfortable and they know we're going to talk about it, then we can talk about, well, I noticed this week I had, a couple of bags of chips.
Yeah.
I've never told anybody that before, so kind of what went on with food this week. And we're also talking about other things like what went on in family dynamics or what went on at work and relationship dynamics. Because, as you know, how you eat is kind of a mirror of how you do life. And so looking at all those things, then they notice like, okay, I paused in the middle of that bag of chips and noticed that I was just eating it because I was frustrated. Maybe they finished eating it. There's no judgment. But it's like, hey, that's a moment to highlight. That was really different. And then they may notice at work, I was really frustrated at work and I was about to tear into this coworker. And then I paused and I thought, is that really what I want to do with my anger? It's the same. It's how the process sort of flows into life.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm using the word crazy a lot, but it's so intense, and especially like how we deal with our emotions with food. It's just like it's just so automatic. Like you don't even know. You don't even know.
Yeah.
Like you're just. It's like, oh, I'm pissed off, and I'm halfway through a bag of chips, and it's like, what? Like it's like waking up. Yeah, the more I guess we can wake up, the better. That's really something came up when I was thinking about it. I have a background in personal training, but I'm putting, personal training can be about weight loss, which is harmful. That's one of the reasons I kind of was like, this kind of what opened my eyes to intuitive eating was like, this is wrong. Like, this is not like, I know like people aren't going to like, anyway. So my personal training background kind of, and maybe it was because I was a personal trainer and people just assumed, or I don't know, whatever reason. But I think I would ask people, hey, what'd you eat this week? In kind of a safe tone, like, yeah, you and I could hear people, I didn't want to call them out for quote unquote lying. I knew there was, there's defenses, it's a sensitive topic, but at the same time, it seemed like they were saying the correct answer. They're like, oh yeah, I had a, for breakfast, I had some protein and I had what I mean? Like, so when you said that, asking that question to people, I was kind of like, like that. I definitely understand how we need to have just an open, no shame conversation. I guess it hasn't been my experience that, people haven't been asked that and that they feel uncomfortable. About it.
And you can notice in how they answer it. Usually there's some, because a lot of times people are using food as a passive communication vehicle. And so it's kind of like when some people sit down for dinner and they start talking about what they're going to order from the menu, whether they realize it or not, how they describe what they're going to order, they may or may not be trying to say, hey, I know I'm fat, so I'm going to pick these things. If they start saying, well, what's the health? I'm going to not have the dressing or whatever they're doing. It's important for them to be able to recognize, what are you trying to convey to the group? What are you wanting to convey through your food choices? So I would imagine if your trainer asks you that there may be some like, well, wasn't, some good or bad language, some things like that too. And that is a place to begin to explore, like, what if food was neutral? It's one of the most challenging conversations. I've worked with a lot of families with kids with eating disorders in treatment and out of treatment. And one of the most difficult conversations, one of the places where I get the most like looks of horror in there is when I say, hey, part of the recovery process is to neutralize food, to neutralize it. And they're like, what? Because it's so different. And so as I explained, the goal is neutralize the emotional intent of food. Because when food has an emotional value, and is worse than something else, and then there has to be something done to make up for it. So however bad it is the degree to which you have to make up for it or compensate or apologize for it, or even just beat yourself up for it. And so if a carrot and a cupcake are emotionally neutral, then you get to go through your life and give them both exactly 1 minute of your day.
Yeah. People tie their identity, it's like, it's the reason it's so emotional is because it's like their self-worth, their who they are, their whatever, like it's, I'm good and worthy of love if I eat this, but if I eat that, it's I'm guilty piece of shit, blah blah blah. That's probably it is one of the hardest conversations, because some of these fears come up, like I'm going to eat unhealthy. Like that's something I run up against. And that's kind of that's probably the first reaction to, we got to neutralize food. And they say, well, what about eating unhealthy?
I'm going to eat whatever their scariest food is. They'll say, well, I'm just going to eat donuts all the time. I'm like, you won't. Your body's going to ask for donuts all the time, or Reese's or Twinkies or whatever it is. Like, that's usually their responses. Yeah. And especially a parent who's not sure, who's gotten unsettled in how to guide their child through food, whether their food story or whatever, they're just like, oh no, because they'll just sit on the couch and drink and eat chips or whatever. Like, and it's helpful for them to name their fear. And then I'm kind of like, okay, let's prove it. Go for it. And nobody that I've worked with has consistently then lived on Twinkies. They find it, and it's beautiful.
It is like, once people kind of like, I gave myself permission to have that, and I didn't, I ate it and I loved it, and I actually had a little more, but I was good after that, and I didn't want more. What, for someone who's new to exploring eating those quote unquote unhealthy foods, becoming neutral food, allowing some education has got to be useful. Like, they're going to ask, how long will I desire donuts for? What can I expect? And how would you answer those questions?
Yeah, it's a very common question. Yeah. It typically, I'll tell you, and whoever's listening, it doesn't usually take that long.
Yeah.
When I'm working with somebody, I want them to take it one day at a time. So, because that's part of their whole process is future tripping, projecting. And so what they're really asking often is, if I let myself eat a donut, or if I let myself eat donuts unconditionally, I'm going to be eating them 10 years from now. So and part of the whole process is, let's just come back to today. And every day this week, I want you to ask your body, does it want a donut? And I don't care what the answer is. I just want them to get used to asking their body, does it want a donut? And they don't know. It's going to be really muddled up, because their brain is going to be, that maybe that child adolescent part of their brain is going to be like, heck yeah, party, let's do it. But that doesn't last forever. And also, at some point, their body's going to say, I don't think so. Maybe a glass of water. It'll ask for something different. And again, no judgment, just noticing. And, and I think that's where having that weekly therapy appointment, because when you think about how many times a week you encounter a food choice or decision, the math, I haven't even done the math, but it's way a bunch.
Yeah.
And so having a weekly appointment, safely, okay, at least next Thursday at 2, I'm going to see Wendy and talk to her about this. So the gap of destruction is only a week at a time. And that provides a lot of, you may not realize it, but it provides a lot of foundational safety and comfort in the process.
Yeah. Because that animal side, I feels like I haven't worked with a whole lot of people who've experienced it ongoing, like that animal side. It seems to not be like too bad once people can kind of just let it. but maybe that animal side is worse for some other people. That, when people first give themselves permission, they really, do that mindful eating thing where they get that forbidden food, they eat it, they love it. What's the longest you've seen someone, not the longest, because we don't want to talk about outliers. What's a longer?
It's not that bad though.
I guess.
It really.
Or what is what's a longer period of time? So let's say we're going to use donuts or whatever.
A few months, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe a few months. Yeah. And typically what will happen, and this happened for me too, it's that whole, and I remember thinking, that's impossible. But that whole thought of whatever it is that you're afraid of eating, have it in the house. And then before you know it, you look in the cabinet one day and there'll be a half a bag of it or a half a container of it. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, I forgot to devour that because you've let go, you've shifted, and it happens. You almost kind of notice after the fact. I've seen that happen with many, many clients, and so it is super freeing. It's to be able to when they see it for themselves, and it doesn't even take a couple of months.
Got you. And in this time period, they have that. They have it accessible. Not visual. I've heard, I have it accessible, but not visual.
Okay.
But
I don't care.
It's accessible.
It can sit beside your bed. I don't care.
Yeah. And in intuitive eating, sometimes they say when you're getting used to following your what your gut asks, getting used to what your gut asks and what it wants, and when it wants these foods, you give it to it, and that fear of gaining weight, that fear of eating unhealthy, and even in the intuitive eating book, right? There's that period where your body's going to be a little more lethargic, adjusting. How do you talk about that? How do you say to someone who's coming from a background of you got to lose weight to you might not lose any weight, and you might, in this time period, you might actually gain a little bit. How do you approach that?
Yeah. Well, I think normalizing it is super important. That your body, and part of the whole, intuitive eating talks about putting weight loss on the back burner, but part of the whole process here is if your driving thought is, I've got to lose weight, then we also want to talk about what is that thought about? So the conversation becomes, what are you longing for there? And sometimes I use, I don't know if you're familiar with the Wizard of Oz, but sometimes, and they say we're off to see the wizard because, sometimes it's helpful to apply that to, I've got to lose weight. Why? Well, because. Usually by the third because, you're able to tap into what is the real story here. Is it nobody will like me? Or, there's a fear under this that weight loss is the magical answer for. And it's important to notice, and I think it's important to look at weight loss as a magical answer, because when you start to shift away from weight loss as the magical answer, and you don't understand that was what was going on, you shift to something else being a magical answer. So maybe you shift out of weight loss being the one, and then it's, I've got to have a boyfriend, or I've got to have $5,000, or whatever it is. If you want to notice what makes it magical. So if there's if this, then I'll be okay. It's magical.
Yeah.
Kind of naming that.
Yeah.
So noticing that the body is not made to stay static at a weight. It's going to fluctuate, and that can be really, really different. We also want to talk about it very specifically with each client, because each person's experience is so unique. Either if they're used to, let's say if they're used to restricting all day and then binging at night, then they are not used to any food in their belly to digest. And so that may feel like 20 pounds of weight gain to them, but what I know is this is just that meal digesting, but you're not used to that physical sensation of food being in your belly. So whatever it is, like it's important to discuss with each person, like what is going on for them and what's creating that sensation, that fear, that feeling, and helping them work through that individually.
Yeah. These fears are, so individual. Everyone has their own why. Like probably, I think mine is, some sort of. It's all getting love somehow, or somehow related to that. If we keep asking why, but understanding our process. Avoiding failure. That whole thing, avoiding fear and stuff like that. Trying to see what I'm feeling right now. I'm trying to use my intuition to guide me on asking questions.
Take a breath. Yeah, notice.
Yeah. What do you think intuitive eating, you see all these mainstream articles these days. It's becoming more and more mainstream. I've gotten some pushback as well on weight loss enlightenment. It sounds like I'm promoting weight loss, and I understand. I'm coming from a yoga. I lived for a Zen monk, and I try to approach it. I see this very in Buddhist terms, just like it makes so much sense to me in terms of speaking the Buddhist language. So I feel okay with it. I feel like I'm being authentic, but as it goes more mainstream, there's some worry that this will turn into another diet, that people are going to take a surface layer understanding of it. What do you think about that? Are you worried? It resonates a lot with me in the mindfulness field, because there's that exact same fear in the mindfulness spectrum. I remember, I remember talking to a woman a while back, and she got pretty triggered because core power kind of hijacked. She felt core power hijacked mindfulness and was turning it into something commercial and taking away from the spirit of it. What do you feel about that kind of movement happening as intuitive eating grows more and more mainstream?
Yeah, fantastic question. I've definitely given it a lot of thought. I have an Instagram page, and as I look at that, and then I follow, Evelyn Tribbley has an Instagram that I think is worth following, because she is speaking to this regularly, very nicely. So that's one thing. To me, it's very, how would I say this? I'm not scared of it, because if you're doing intuitive eating right, you don't care what people are saying. That's because you've really gotten grounded in yourself, and you are connecting with your own values, your own sense of self, your own sense of how do you want food to show up in your life? How do you want exercise to show up in your life? How do you want your relationship? How do you want to think about your body? And even I'll use this as an example too, because see if this connects. My son's getting married in September, and I was talking with some other people about weddings and wedding dresses and things like this too, and thinking about the whole, that's the time to ask yourself a question, like, how much of my thought give over on that wedding day of my son, or if it was my wedding, or if I was a bridesmaid or whatever, like how many of my thoughts do I want to give over to how I look in my dress, other than the color? Do I feel comfortable in it? And I'll just give a plug, his adorable, sweet fiance, who I do love. That was one of the things that because we talk about this stuff a lot. You can't be around me and not hear about it. But she just instinctually, as she was trying on wedding dresses, the first thing she said was, how do I feel in this? And I loved that. She's a beautiful girl, and all these things. And but she asked her body first, and that's a big thing, is ask your body how it feels in it. And then ask your heart, what does it want to remember about that day? And so things like that can be really helpful. So if you're doing that kind of intuitive eating, and you see someone say, oh, it's just a diet or whatever, you don't care because you know it's not. It's actually freed you from that. And you can apply enough curiosity around, okay, they're probably, that person, whoever's saying that about it, is probably still looking for a magic cure. And so it's helpful. It reminds me a lot of yoga. And I'll add this too, because I'm doing some workshops in April of this called Yoga, Money, and Intention. Then I'm going to do some later, Yoga, Food, and Intention. But this friend of mine is a yoga teacher. We were working on this because we're taking common money beliefs, which are similar to diet beliefs, you know, like kind of that thing. And we're working through the chakras, and we were kind of naming all these things and really coming to, there's two key, if you're familiar with the chakras, which I'm imagining you are, that the root chakra is about stability and foundation and things like that. The solar plexus chakra is this one that's in the middle that really encompasses your belly, that has so much to do with how you feel about who you are and yourself and in relationship with others and stuff like that. I won't go too much into it, but definitely fly to Denver quickly and be here for the workshops. So, and there's information on my website if you are in Denver listening to this. But it is, you know, as we were talking through it again, I was struck with, I was like, oh my gosh, that is where that eating disorder lives, in that solar plexus chakra, that system of how you know, what you're feeling about yourself and others and how it comes out in food. And it's just, I think, important to be mindful and to know these things and to recognize that's what's going on. If that helps answer your question. What do you think? Did that answer your question?
I'm thinking what my question was, but I want to riff on what you said. Because the stomach, it was interesting. The solar plexus right underneath the lungs and the stomach area.
Yes.
Like scientists these days are, you know, they're saying like it's your gut is your second brain, and so it's very not surprising to me that you say it lives in our gut, and that, you know, it's like that's why it can be so hard to you know, logically you might understand it, but then you still gotta work with your gut instinct, and your gut instinct developed over years, which is why I love self-compassion. Like that's my thing. Self-compassion is like
so important.
You know, so important. Like, oh my God, yeah. Like just you don't, you know, when you grow up with a default voice of thinking you always need to improve something, which is me, and that what you did wasn't good enough, and, you know, you're the one who failed, and that whole thing. You know, it's really hard to shift into that self-compassion voice. Chakras, I love them. As for the question, I forgot what I asked. It was something about it's all good. It's all good. Right. I guess maybe that's a good sign to, like, we can keep it short and sweet today, I guess.
Okay.
You know, I don't know. Let's see. We'll keep it short and sweet. And you have a workshop coming up in Denver. Right?
Yes.
That's an interesting, you know, you're involved with yoga and finance and eating disorder and intuitive eating. It's so interesting to me how this intuitive eating stuff, I loved what you said earlier about the mirror. You know, there's a dilemma, you know, the mirror is, reality is our mirror. So how we relate to food is, you know, how we relate to this intuitive eating thing is like, it's like yoga. I say it's like yoga for weight loss.
Yes.
Because it's like how you show up on the mat. You know, they say you practice on the mat as a microcosm for the macrocosm. Like, this is why I love it. It's like
so true.
It's like how you do food is how you do life, and I love that whole, like, making. I just love, like, the spiritual practice of it, I guess. Of food. That's kind of one of the reasons why I got out of. I'm still teaching a little bit of yoga. I'm just at one studio, but it wasn't like, just coming from a deep background in meditation, like living in a community of meditation, there's a lot more immersion that I go into classes and I'm like, this is it. Like, y'all just doing warrior two. Like, you're not working the chakras. You're not, like, You're not working with the gut. You're not working like the heart. Like there's a much deeper aspect that wasn't being taught in public yoga classes. So yeah, that's what kind of led me into anyways, personal training. And then I was like, wait, personal training's messed up too. And then it was like, and then to this current venture, which I'm pretty sure is you know, this journey that I'll be taking for many years. It's just so, I love it so much. So thank you so much for coming on. How's a good way for people to reach you? Phone, email, what have you? Stay in touch, you know?
Totally. I'm at wendywrightcounseling.com. So that's easy to find. My email is wendy@wendywrightcounseling.com. My phone number and all that contact information is on my webpage. I also have a link there to the workshops if you happen to be in the Denver area in April. And also I have on there a link to a short little webinar that I did on the intersection of money and milkshakes. So if that is intriguing to anybody, feel free to click on that and request the link for that. It's the sort of a primer on the topic. Because when I stepped out into private practice a few months ago, you know, you do all the branding and thinking of, you know, who's your ideal client, who you want to work with. And I could not separate food and money because as soon as the magical thinking stops about one, it pops up in the other. And I've seen it so many times that I think it's really helpful to just know that those are going to be connected. And we want to apply the same curiosity and not judgment to both. So it's really really cool. You can go right onto my website. There is a block. This is intuitive eating counseling. So click here and book an appointment. Like it's that simple. If you want to do that, or you're welcome to just ask for a free consult call as well.
Cool. Money and milkshakes?
Yeah. The intersection of money and milkshakes. It's fun.
What's it about? Like, you know, I know we're wrapping up, but it's like, I imagine it's being like the, you know, Stanford grad paper or something like that. Kind of like a tongue in cheek or whatever, you know, money. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Well, it's, you know, it's about how I discovered this connection. My first job was I was in mortgage banking. I've done real estate. I've flipped houses. I've done things like that. And I became a counselor, and then I've worked with eating disorders. And so I think just as, you know, you were saying when you were doing training, it was kind of natural for you to ask about food without really meaning it. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to ask about this, you know, like for me, I very normally asked about money, and I began to see parallel relationships. People who restrict food restrict their spending. People who binge and purge food have a lot of chaos there, tend to have a lot of chaos with their spending. And then when I was in the treatment center setting, it became really obvious because I'm working with their families or I'm seeing them and they're there. And a lot of times, for instance, when they would stop engaging in eating disorder behaviors, they would start receiving tons of boxes from Amazon at the center because that's where their deliveries were made. And I'm like, what's going on here? And they would be like, I just can't stop shopping. And when we talked about it, they would actually, we would go through, I'd say, let's pull up the website, look at this. And they're like, yeah, I look at this shirt. And I'm like, if I can just have this shirt, I'll feel okay about my body. And I'm like, oh, wasn't that what you were thinking about that eating disorder behavior? And it helps. Actually, I've seen it just remove some of the shame. When they see that it shows up, bless you, in different areas, that the shame goes down because they're like, oh, I'm not just stupid. I have this like way that I'm trying to deal with life. And it gives them more room to talk about it with their loved ones. And so all that to say, you can check that out. If you want to talk about it more, we can definitely do some more talking about it.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.